I arrived at Golden Crust Bakery at 5 in the morning, just like I had every single day for the past 12 years. The familiar scent of rising dough and vanilla extract should have comforted me, but something felt different. My parents stood in the back office legal papers scattered across the worn wooden desk like fallen leaves. Mom couldn't meet my eyes when she spoke the words that shattered my world. "We're signing the bakery over to your sister." Dad cleared his throat, explaining how Madison's marketing degree made her better suited for modern business. I stood there flour still, dusting my hands from the morning prep, watching my entire life crumble. The weight of their decision crashed over me like a tidal wave. 12 years of my life, and they were dismissing me as if I were just another employee they could replace. Madison will be taking over operations starting next week. Dad continued, his voice lacking any warmth or acknowledgement of what this meant to me. "You can stay on as a regular baker, of course." Stay on as a regular baker. In the business, I had practically rebuilt from the ground up. The office door swung open and Madison waltzed in with her perfectly styled auburn hair and designer blazer, carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than I made in a month. She surveyed the room with the confidence of someone who had already won a war I didn't even know we were fighting. "Good morning, everyone," she chirped, setting down architectural blueprints and renovation plans. "I've been working with a design firm to modernize our brand identity. We need to think bigger, more contemporary. Our brand identity." She had visited the bakery maybe 10 times in the past 5 years, usually just to grab free pastries for her friends. "Madison has some wonderful ideas about expanding our market reach," Mom said, finally making eye contact with me. "She's been studying our customer demographics and believes we've been too focused on traditional approaches." I wanted to laugh, but the sound caught in my throat. Traditional approaches, like the grandmother's apple pie recipe that brought customers from 3 towns over, like the custom wedding cakes that had built our reputation throughout the county. Madison spread her blueprints across the desk, pointing to various sections with a gold-plated pen. "We'll need to remove most of the vintage display cases and replace them with modern glass units. The color scheme needs updating too. This whole rustic farmhouse aesthetic is very 2010, and every word she spoke felt like sandpaper against my soul. Those vintage display cases had been hand-restored by me during the renovation I funded with my own savings when the business was struggling 5 years ago. The rustic farmhouse aesthetic reflected the history of our community, something customers treasured about the experience. "What about the signature items?" I managed to ask, my voice barely above a whisper. Madison flipped through her portfolio, pulling out printed spreadsheets and market analysis reports. "Most of those recipes need updating for contemporary tastes. I've been consulting with a food trend specialist who believes we should focus more on gluten-free options and superfood ingredients." The signature items she was so casually dismissing included my grandmother's cinnamon roll recipe, the one that had customers lining up before we opened, the chocolate croissants I had perfected after months of trial and error, the seasonal fruit tarts that local restaurants ordered exclusively from us. Madison has also identified some inefficiencies in our current staffing model, Dad added, glancing at a document she handed him. Staffing inefficiencies, I had streamlined our operations to run with minimal waste and maximum quality. Every person on our small team had been chosen for their dedication and skill. Some of the longer-term employees have become too comfortable with outdated methods. Madison explained, making notes in the margins of her papers. "We'll need to implement new training protocols and performance metrics." Mrs. Patterson, who had worked here for 15 years and could decorate a wedding cake with her eyes closed, was apparently now an outdated method. Tommy, our delivery driver, who knew every customer's name and preferences, needed performance metrics to justify his existence. The conversation continued around me as if I were invisible. They discussed profit projections, renovation timelines, and marketing strategies without once acknowledging that I had been the one keeping this place profitable for the past decade. When I was 22 and fresh out of high school, this bakery was 3 months away from bankruptcy. I had dropped out of culinary school, used my college fund to cover overdue supplier payments, and worked 18-hour days to rebuild our reputation. I think we should also consider expanding into catering services. Madison suggested pulling out another set of documents. I've identified several untapped market opportunities in the corporate sector. Catering services that I had been quietly handling for 2 years, building relationships with local businesses and event planners through personal connections and word-of-mouth referrals. The final blow came when Madison opened a folder marked Financial Analysis and spread out charts and graphs that painted a picture of declining efficiency and missed opportunities. According to her data, customer satisfaction had been dropping, profit margins were stagnating, and our market position was vulnerable to competition. These numbers show we've been operating below potential for quite some time, she said, pointing to various highlighted sections. With proper management and modern marketing strategies, we could double our revenue within 18 months. I stared at those charts, recognizing manipulated data when I saw it. The customer satisfaction surveys she referenced had been conducted during our busiest holiday season, when wait times were naturally longer. The profit margin calculations conveniently ignored the equipment investments and building improvements I had implemented. The competition analysis failed to mention that 2 of our supposed rivals had actually gone out of business in the past year. But my parents nodded along with every word, convinced by her professional presentation and confident delivery. Madison secured initial funding from several investors who are excited about the growth potential. Mom announced as if this were wonderful news we should all celebrate together. Investors. She had brought strangers into our family business, people who would expect returns and might eventually demand changes that had nothing to do with our community or values. The meeting concluded with handshakes and congratulations all around. Madison was officially the new owner-operator of Golden Crust Bakery, effective immediately. I was graciously invited to continue as a staff baker, reporting directly to her and following whatever new procedures she deemed necessary. As everyone filed out of the office to begin their day, I remained frozen in my chair, staring at the papers that had just signed away everything I had worked for. The betrayal cut deeper than I could have imagined possible. This wasn't just about business ownership or family dynamics. This was about my identity, my purpose, my entire adult life being dismissed as inadequate by the people who were supposed to love and support me most. But what hurt even more was the realization that this hadn't been a sudden decision. The investors, the market analysis, the renovation plans. Madison had been orchestrating this takeover for months, systematically building a case against me while I worked tirelessly to make the business successful enough for her to want it. The next few days blurred together in a haze of humiliation and confusion. Madison wasted no time implementing her vision for the bakery's future. She arrived each morning at 8:30, well after the bulk of our prep work was complete, carrying her laptop and coffee from the trendy chain store 2 blocks away. Her first official act was reorganizing the work schedule. Suddenly, I found myself assigned to basic tasks I hadn't done since my first year. Measuring, flour washing, mixing bowls, packaging day-old items for discount sale. Meanwhile, she brought in a consultant named Jeffrey who spoke in marketing jargon and took notes about operational optimization opportunities. On Thursday afternoon, I was restocking the display case when Madison's phone rang. She stepped into the storage room to take the call, but the walls were thin, and her voice carried clearly to where I stood. "Derek, the timeline is perfect." She said, her tone completely different from the professional demeanor she maintained in front of our parents. "The investors are ready to move forward as soon as the transition period is complete." I froze a tray of dinner rolls halfway to the shelf. 6 months should be plenty of time to establish the new management structure and document all the recipes, she continued. "Once we have everything properly cataloged, we can proceed with the sale negotiations." Sale negotiations. My blood turned to ice. The corporate buyers are especially interested in the signature items. They think the recipes will scale beautifully for mass production. We're looking at a 7-figure deal, maybe more, if the market testing goes well. Seven-figure deal, corporate buyers, mass production. Madison was planning to sell the bakery to a chain operation using our family recipes and customer base to maximize her profit before walking away completely. Of course, the current staff won't be retained. She laughed a sound that made my skin crawl. The whole point is to streamline operations and eliminate the personal touch nonsense that's been holding this place back. Once we hand over the recipes and customer data, they can run everything with minimum wage workers and automated systems. Mrs. Patterson, who had been decorating cakes here since before Madison was born, would be thrown away like yesterday's bread. Tommy, who supported his elderly mother and disabled brother with his delivery job, would become unnecessary overhead. All the relationships we had built with suppliers, customers, and community members would be reduced to data points in a corporate acquisition. Alva has no idea what's coming. Madison continued, and I realized she was talking about me. She's been so focused on her little artistic projects that she hasn't noticed the bigger picture. By the time she figures out what's happening, everything will be locked in legally. Artistic projects. The custom cakes that brought in 30% of our revenue were artistic projects. The parents are completely convinced that I'm saving the business from her mismanagement. I showed them those modified financial reports we discussed, and they bought every word. They actually thanked me for stepping in before things got worse. Modified financial reports. She had been lying to our parents about my performance, manipulating numbers to make me look incompetent while positioning herself as the savior. Derek, you were brilliant with those fake customer complaint letters. They really sealed the deal when I showed them how Alva's traditional approach was alienating younger demographics. Fake customer complaints. My hand started shaking as the full scope of her deception became clear. Once the corporate sale goes through, we'll have enough capital for your downtown development project. The bakery property alone is worth twice what they think, especially with the zoning changes coming next year. The downtown development project. Derek wasn't just her boyfriend. He was a real estate developer who had been orchestrating this entire scheme to get his hands on our prime location. We just need to make sure Alva doesn't cause any problems during the transition. I've been documenting every mistake she makes, building a case for why she's not suitable for management responsibilities. If she tries to fight the decision, I'll have plenty of ammunition to discredit her. Madison ended the call and returned to the front of the bakery where I was still standing with the dinner rolls trying to process everything I had just heard. She smiled at me with false warmth, completely unaware that her entire plan had just been exposed. "Alva, we need to talk about tomorrow's special orders," she said, consulting her tablet. "I think we should simplify the wedding cake design for the Morrison reception. All those intricate sugar flowers you planned are unnecessarily complicated." The Morrison wedding cake had been planned for 3 months. The bride had specifically requested elaborate sugar peonies to match her bouquet, and I had been perfecting the technique for weeks. But Madison saw it as unnecessary complication, another example of my impractical artistic tendencies. "I'll handle the customer communication going forward," she added. "We need consistent messaging about our new direction and capabilities." Consistent messaging. She was going to tell the Morrisons that their dream cake was being simplified for operational efficiency, probably blaming me for over-promising on the original design. That evening, I drove home in a daze, my mind racing with everything I had discovered. The betrayal was even worse than I had imagined. Madison wasn't just taking over the bakery. She was planning to destroy it completely for personal profit. Every tradition, every relationship, every element that made Golden Crust special would be sacrificed for corporate efficiency and maximum financial return. But what made me feel physically sick was realizing how thoroughly she had manipulated our parents. The financial reports, the customer complaints, the market analysis, it was all fabricated to create a narrative where I was the problem and she was the solution. They genuinely believed they were saving the business from my inadequate management. I tried calling Mom that night, hoping to explain what I had overheard, but she cut me off before I could get halfway through the story. "Alva, I know this transition is difficult for you." she said in the patient tone people use with children throwing tantrums. But Madison has shown us documentation of serious problems that need to be addressed. Your resistance to change is exactly what she warned us about. Documentation of serious problems. Translation more of Madison's fabricated evidence designed to discredit anything I might say in my own defense. She's trying to help you understand modern business practices, Mom continued. Maybe if you worked with her instead of against her, you could learn something valuable. Work with her. Learn something valuable. From the person who is planning to sell our family legacy to corporate vultures and leave our employees unemployed. I spent most of that night staring at the ceiling trying to figure out what options I had left. Madison held all the cards. She had legal ownership, parental support, investor backing, and months of carefully planted evidence to support whatever story she wanted to tell. But she had made one crucial mistake. She had underestimated exactly how much I cared about this place and the people who depended on it. She thought I would quietly accept my demotion and fade into the background while she executed her plan. Instead, she had just given me the motivation I needed to fight back with everything I had. Madison's transformation of the bakery accelerated with ruthless efficiency. By the second week, she had replaced our handwritten daily specials board with a digital display that cycled through generic promotional messages. The warm lighting that had created such a welcoming atmosphere was swapped out for harsh fluorescent fixtures that made everything look clinical and cold. But the changes went far beyond aesthetics. She began systematically dismantling everything that made Golden Crust unique. Our traditional sourdough starter, which had been maintained continuously for 8 years, was replaced with commercial yeast packets because they were more reliable and cost-effective. The seasonal menu rotations that kept customers excited about returning were eliminated in favor of a standardized selection that could be produced year-round with frozen ingredients. Mrs. Patterson approached me on Wednesday morning, her usually cheerful demeanor replaced with worry lines around her eyes. "Alva, dear, I need to speak with you privately," she whispered, glancing around to make sure Madison wasn't within earshot. We stepped into the alley behind the building where delivery trucks usually unloaded supplies. "She's been timing everything I do," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice trembling slightly. "Yesterday she stood behind me with a stopwatch while I decorated the Henderson anniversary cake. Then she told me that my methods are too slow for modern productivity standards." I felt anger rising in my chest like steam from boiling water. Mrs. Patterson was an artist. Her cake decorations were so beautiful that customers often ordered cakes just to display at parties before cutting them. She had taught me everything I knew about sugar work and royal icing techniques. She wants me to use pre-made decorative elements instead of creating custom designs, Mrs. Patterson continued. Says hand piping takes too long and the results aren't consistent enough for professional standards. Pre-made decorative elements, plastic flowers and generic borders that could be stuck onto any cake by anyone with basic motor skills. "I've been doing this for 37 years, she said, tears beginning to form in her eyes. "I know I'm not as fast as I used to be, but I've never had a single customer complain about my work." That was because her work was magnificent. Wedding photographers regularly asked brides where they had gotten their cakes because Mrs. Patterson's creations were so stunning they enhanced every picture. "Has she said anything about letting you go?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "Not directly, but she's been asking questions about my retirement plans and whether I've considered transitioning to a less demanding role. Yesterday, she mentioned that they're exploring automated decorating equipment that could handle most of our cake orders." Automated decorating equipment. Madison was planning to replace skilled craftsmanship with machines that could squeeze frosting in predetermined patterns. That afternoon, I watched Madison interact with customers for the first time since taking over. A regular patron, Mrs. Chen, came in asking about our apple turnovers, which had been temporarily removed from the display case due to a supplier issue with organic apples. "We've discontinued that item," Madison said curtly, not looking up from her laptop screen. "It wasn't meeting our quality consistency standards." Mrs. Chen looked confused. She had been buying apple turnovers every Friday for 3 years. "Could I special order some?" she asked, hopefully. "My husband really looks forward to them." "We don't do special orders for discontinued items," Madison replied, still focused on her computer. "Might I suggest trying our new protein bars? They're much more aligned with current nutritional trends." Protein bars, in a bakery that had built its reputation on comfort food and traditional pastries. Mrs. Chen left empty-handed and obviously disappointed. She had been one of our most loyal customers, always bringing friends and family members to try new items. Madison had just alienated her in less than 2 minutes with pure indifference. But the breaking point came on Friday morning. I arrived at my usual 5 o'clock start time to find Madison already in the kitchen, standing over Mrs. Patterson with a clipboard and timer. "Your piping technique is inconsistent," Madison was saying. "Look at this border. The rosettes vary in size by at least 3 millimeters. Corporate standards require uniformity within 1 millimeter tolerance." Corporate standards. We weren't a corporation. We were a family bakery where slight variations in hand pipe decorations were part of the charm. "I can try to be more precise," Mrs. Patterson said quietly, her hands shaking as she held the piping bag. "At your age, I don't think precision improvement is realistic," Madison replied coldly. "We need to discuss whether this position is still a good fit for your capabilities." I couldn't stay silent any longer. "Mrs. Patterson is the most skilled decorator in the county," I said, stepping forward. "Customers specifically request her work." Madison turned to face me with an expression of manufactured patience. "Alva, I understand you're attached to traditional methods, but we need to prioritize efficiency and consistency over sentimental preferences." Sentimental preferences. She was talking about decades of expertise and artistry as if it were nostalgia for outdated technology. "Her work is beautiful," I insisted. "Quality should matter more than speed." "Beauty is subjective," Madison said dismissively. "Profit margins are objective. Mrs. Patterson's hourly output doesn't justify her wage rate when we can achieve similar results with standardized tools." Mrs. Patterson's eyes filled with tears. She had dedicated half her life to this place, and Madison was reducing her value to a mathematical equation. "I think you should go home early today," Madison told Mrs. Patterson. "Take the weekend to consider whether you want to adapt to our new standards or explore other opportunities." Other opportunities. At 70 years old in a small town where the bakery was one of the few places that valued traditional skills. Mrs. Patterson untied her apron with shaking hands and gathered her personal decorating tools from the workstation. As she walked toward the exit, she stopped next to me. "I'm sorry, dear," she whispered. "I hope you can save this place." After she left, Madison turned back to her clipboard as if nothing significant had just happened. "We'll need to adjust Monday's production schedule to account for the staffing change," she said matter-of-factly. "I've already contacted a supplier about automated decorating equipment. It should be installed by next week." That was when I realized the full scope of what was happening. Madison wasn't just changing the bakery. She was systematically destroying everything that made it worth saving. Every person who cared about quality and craftsmanship would be eliminated. Every tradition that connected us to our community would be discarded. Every recipe that couldn't be mass-produced would be abandoned. But the final insult came later that afternoon. I was cleaning the kitchen after the day's production when Madison approached me with a manila folder and a serious expression. "We need to discuss your personal recipe collection," she said, opening the folder to reveal photocopies of pages from my grandmother's handwritten cookbook. My blood ran cold. That cookbook contained family recipes passed down through 3 generations, including techniques and variations that existed nowhere else. I'd brought it to work occasionally to reference specific details when developing new items for the bakery. "These recipes are now company property," Madison continued. "Since they were developed or refined on company time using company resources, they belong to the business. I'll need you to sign this transfer agreement." She handed me a legal document that would surrender all rights to recipes I had created, including ones that had never been used in the bakery. Family recipes that predated the business by decades. "This is ridiculous," I said, my voice rising. "Half of these recipes are from my grandmother's personal collection. They have nothing to do with the business. According to our legal counsel, any recipe used in this facility becomes company intellectual property." Madison replied smoothly, "If you want to continue working here, you'll need to sign the agreement." I stared at the document in disbelief. She was trying to steal my family's culinary heritage and hold my job hostage to force compliance. "What if I refuse?" Madison's smile turned predatory. "Then I'll have to conclude that you're not committed to the team environment we're trying to build. I'd have to let you go for inability to adapt to company policies." She was going to fire me either way. If I signed the agreement, she would own everything I had ever created and could use it however she wanted for her corporate sale. If I refused, she would eliminate me as a potential threat and claim I had been uncooperative and resistant to change. "I need time to think about this," I said. "Of course," Madison replied. "Take the weekend, but I'll need your decision first thing Monday morning." That evening, I sat in my kitchen holding my grandmother's cookbook, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Madison had played her game perfectly. She had isolated me from family support, eliminated my allies, documented my supposed failures, and now she was moving to control the one thing that truly belonged to me. But she had made one critical error in her calculations. She had pushed me beyond the point where I had anything left to lose. I spent that weekend in what felt like the most important planning session of my life. Everything Madison had done was carefully calculated to leave me powerless, but her confidence had made her careless in ways she didn't realize. My first call was to James Morrison, whose law practice specialized in employment and small business issues. We'd gone to high school together, and he had ordered his wedding cake from us 5 years earlier. "James, I need legal advice about intellectual property and business fraud," I said when he answered his personal line on Saturday morning. "Alva, what's going on?" I explained the situation as clearly as I could, from Madison's takeover to her demands for recipe ownership to what I had overheard about the corporate sale plan. "Bring me whatever documentation you have," he said immediately. "If what you're describing is accurate, there are several laws being broken. Family recipes that predate the business relationship can't be claimed as company property. And if she's planning to defraud your parents by selling assets they think they're giving her to manage, that's a serious criminal matter." The documentation turned out to be more extensive than I had realized. Over the years, I had kept detailed records of recipe development, customer feedback, supplier relationships, and financial contributions to the business. I had photos of every major project, copies of thank you letters from satisfied customers, and receipts for equipment purchases I had made with my own money. Most importantly, I had my grandmother's original cookbook with dated inscriptions that proved the family recipes existed long before Madison was even born. "This is excellent evidence," James said as he reviewed everything on Sunday afternoon. "But we need proof of her actual intentions regarding the sale. Corporate fraud requires demonstrating intent to deceive." I thought about Madison's phone conversation with Derek, wishing I had recorded it somehow. What if I could get her to admit her plans on record? That would be ideal, but be very careful. If she realizes what you're doing, she could accelerate her timeline or take action against you personally. After leaving James's office, I drove to Mrs. Patterson's house. She lived in a small cottage about 10 minutes from downtown, with a garden full of the flowers she used as inspiration for her cake decorating. "Alva, dear, come in," she said when she opened the door. "I was just making tea." Her kitchen was filled with examples of her artwork, framed photos of elaborate wedding cakes, ribbons from county fair competitions, and thank you cards from countless satisfied customers. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to ask you about something important," I said as she poured tea into delicate china cups. "Have you noticed any specific problems with Madison's business practices?" She was quiet for a long moment, stirring honey into her tea. "I've been in this business for 37 years, she finally said. "I've worked for demanding bosses and difficult customers, but I've never experienced anything like what's happening now." She retrieved a small notebook from a kitchen drawer. "I started writing things down when the criticism began," she explained. "Call it old-fashioned record-keeping, but something didn't feel right." The notebook contained detailed entries about Madison's behavior, impossible productivity demands, contradictory instructions, harsh criticism of work that customers had praised, and attempts to undermine employee confidence. "She's been systematically targeting anyone with experience or institutional knowledge," Mrs. Patterson observed. "Tommy told me she criticized his delivery route efficiency, even though he's never had a late delivery in 8 years. Sarah said Madison questioned her customer service approach after a customer specifically complimented her helpfulness. A pattern of deliberate sabotage designed to justify replacing experienced employees with cheaper, less knowledgeable workers. Would you be willing to document this formally if needed? I asked. Absolutely, she said without hesitation. This place gave me a career I loved for decades. If someone is trying to destroy it for personal gain, I want to help stop them. My next stop was Tommy's apartment complex. He lived in a modest 2-bedroom unit with his elderly mother and his younger brother Kevin, who had developmental disabilities that made traditional employment difficult. Alva. What brings you by? Tommy said when he answered the door. Is everything okay? I explained what I had discovered about Madison's real plans, watching his expression change from confusion to anger to determination. She asked me about my family's situation last week, he said. Wanted to know about Kevin's care requirements and Mom's medical expenses. I thought she was being considerate, but now I realize she was probably calculating how desperate I am to keep this job. Tommy had been with us for 8 years. He knew every customer's preferences, every shortcut through town, and every business relationship that kept our supply chain running smoothly. Madison saw him as an easily replaceable expense. I've been keeping track of customer comments too, he added. People have been asking me what's going on with the changes. Mrs. Rodriguez said her usual Monday morning muffin tasted different. Mr. Thompson asked why we stopped carrying the rye bread his wife loved. I've got at least 20 customers who've expressed concern about the new direction. Customer feedback that Madison had either ignored or suppressed to support her narrative about necessary modernization. Tommy, would you be willing to gather written statements from customers who've complained about recent changes? Absolutely, he said immediately. This job isn't just about the money for me. It's about taking care of people who trust us. If Madison thinks she can throw away relationships that took years to build, she's got another thing coming. Over the next few days, I quietly reached out to other employees, suppliers, and long-term customers. The picture that emerged was even worse than I had imagined. Sarah, our part-time counter staff, had been documenting Madison's rudeness toward elderly customers who needed extra time to make decisions. Our flour supplier mentioned that Madison had been asking detailed questions about pricing structures and profit margins that seemed unusual for day-to-day operations. Several customers had specifically asked if the business was being sold because the atmosphere felt so different. But the most damaging evidence came from an unexpected source. On Wednesday evening, I was leaving the bakery through the back exit when I heard Madison's voice coming from the office. She was on another phone call, and this time I was prepared. I activated the voice recording app on my phone and held it near the slightly open window. Derek, the timeline is moving faster than we expected, she was saying. The employees are starting to ask questions, and I think that pain-in-the-ass sister of mine might be catching on. Pain-in-the-ass sister, how charming. We need to accelerate the documentation phase, she continued. I want all the recipes cataloged and tested for mass production within 2 weeks. Once we have everything we need, we can trigger the termination process for the remaining original staff. Termination process. She was planning to fire everyone as soon as she had extracted their knowledge and skills. The corporate buyers are getting impatient anyway. They want to see proof that we can deliver consistent product quality at scale before finalizing the purchase agreement. Purchase agreement, concrete evidence that the sale was already in progress. I've been replacing the traditional ingredients with cheaper alternatives to improve the profit margins. The customers haven't noticed the difference yet, so we can demonstrate significant cost savings potential. That explained why Mrs. Rodriguez's muffin tasted different. Madison was systematically degrading product quality while documenting the changes as efficiency improvements. The parents are completely convinced that I'm saving the business from bankruptcy. I showed them projected revenues based on corporate production volumes, and they're thrilled about the family's financial security. Projected revenues that would never benefit the family because Madison planned to pocket the entire sale price and leave them with nothing. Alva signed the recipe transfer agreement today, so we now legally own all the intellectual property. Even if she tries to cause problems later, we have documentation that she voluntarily surrendered rights to everything she created. I had not signed any agreement. Madison was lying to Derek about my cooperation, which meant she was planning to forge my signature or claim verbal consent. By next month, we'll have everything we need to complete the transaction. The corporate buyers can take over operations, the original staff will be gone, and we'll walk away with enough money to fund your entire downtown development project. The call ended, and I carefully made my way to my car with the most damaging evidence yet. Madison had just confessed to fraud, theft, and conspiracy on a recording that would hold up in any court. But more importantly, I now knew exactly how much time I had left to stop her. 2 weeks. Thursday morning arrived with the crisp promise of autumn, but I felt like I was preparing for battle rather than another day at work. I had spent the previous evening organizing all the evidence I had gathered, recordings, documentation, witness statements, and financial records that told a very different story than Madison's fabricated reports. My first stop was James Morrison's office, where I delivered copies of everything to ensure the evidence would be preserved regardless of what happened next. This is more than enough to file both civil and criminal complaints, James confirmed after reviewing the recordings. The question is whether you want to handle this privately first or go straight to the authorities. I want to give my parents a chance to understand what's really happening before this becomes a public legal matter, I said. They deserve to know they've been manipulated. Agreed, but be prepared for the possibility that they might not believe you initially. People who've been victims of sophisticated manipulation often resist accepting the truth, especially when it comes from someone the manipulator has discredited. I understood the risk, but I had to try. I arrived at the bakery earlier than usual and asked my parents to meet me in the office before Madison arrived. They seemed puzzled by my serious tone, but agreed to hear me out. "I need you to listen to something," I said, setting my phone on the desk. It's a recording of Madison discussing her real plans for the bakery. I played the most damaging segments of the conversation I had captured, watching their expressions change from confusion to disbelief to horror. "This can't be real," Mom said weakly. "Madison wouldn't lie to us about something this important." "She's been lying about everything," I replied, spreading out the evidence I had compiled. The customer complaints were fabricated. The financial reports were manipulated. The inefficiency problems she documented were either exaggerated or completely false. Dad picked up Mrs. Patterson's notebook, reading through her careful documentation of Madison's hostile behavior toward employees. "Why would she do this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Because she never wanted to run a family bakery," I explained. "She wanted to acquire a profitable business that she could sell to corporate buyers for a massive personal profit. Everything she told you about saving the business was designed to get legal ownership so she could liquidate our assets." Mom was crying now, the full scope of the betrayal beginning to sink in. "What about the investors she mentioned?" Dad asked. "They're not investors in the bakery," I said, showing him printed information about Derek's real estate development company. "They're buyers who want our recipes and location for a corporate expansion. Madison has been selling our family legacy to fund her boyfriend's property development projects." The office door opened and Madison walked in with her usual confident smile, carrying her leather portfolio and coffee from the chain store down the street. Her expression changed immediately when she saw the three of us surrounded by evidence and her parents' tear-stained faces. "What's going on here?" she asked, her voice taking on a defensive edge. "We know about the corporate sale," Dad said quietly. "We know about Derek's development project. We know about the fake customer complaints and manipulated financial reports." Madison's eyes darted around the room, taking in the scattered documents and my phone still sitting on the desk. "I don't know what Alva has been telling you, but she's clearly trying to undermine the improvements I'm making," Madison said, attempting to maintain her composed facade. "She's been resistant to change from the beginning, and now she's fabricating conspiracy theories to discredit legitimate business practices." "We heard the recording of your phone conversation," Mom said, her voice breaking. "We heard you talking about terminating the staff and selling to corporate buyers." The color drained from Madison's face, but she rallied quickly. "That conversation was taken out of context," she said, setting down her portfolio with forced calm. "I was discussing hypothetical scenarios with a business consultant. Due diligence requires exploring all possible options, even ones you don't intend to pursue. It was a reasonable explanation if you didn't know about Derek's real estate company or the documented evidence of her systematic deception." "What about the recipe transfer agreement you claimed Alva signed?" Dad asked, holding up the forged document I had discovered in her files. Madison's composure cracked slightly. She hadn't expected us to find that particular piece of evidence. "Alva did agree to clarify ownership of company intellectual property," she said. "If she's changed her mind about honoring that agreement, we can discuss modifications." "I never agreed to anything," I said firmly. "And those recipes aren't company property. Most of them are family recipes that existed long before this business was even established." At that moment, the front door chimed and we could hear someone entering the bakery. Madison excused herself to handle the customer, but I could tell she was using the interruption to regroup and plan her next move. "She's going to deny everything," I warned my parents. "And she'll probably accelerate her timeline now that she knows we're aware of her plans." "What do we do?" Mom asked, looking overwhelmed by the situation. "We document everything that happens from this point forward," I said. "And we make sure the community knows what's really going on before she can complete the sale." Madison returned a few minutes later with Derek, who had apparently been waiting in his car outside. He was a tall man in his 40s with perfectly styled hair and an expensive suit that looked out of place in our small-town bakery. "I understand there's been some confusion about Madison's business planning process," Derek said smoothly, extending his hand toward Dad. "I'm Derek Collins, and I've been providing strategic consulting services to help modernize the operations here." Strategic consulting services. He was trying to legitimize his involvement as professional business advice rather than personal manipulation. "Mr. Collins," James Morrison said, walking into the office behind Derek, "I'm representing the family's interests in this matter. I think we need to have a more formal discussion about the legal implications of what's been taking place here." Derek's confident demeanor faltered when he realized a lawyer had been brought into the situation. "I'm not sure what legal implications you're referring to," Derek said carefully. "Madison is the rightful owner of this business, and any strategic planning she chooses to pursue is entirely within her rights. Actually, the ownership transfer was based on fraudulent representations," James replied, pulling out copies of the evidence we had compiled. "When someone obtains property through deliberate deception, that transfer can be legally voided." Madison and Derek exchanged a look that confirmed they knew exactly how much trouble they were in. "Furthermore," James continued, "the systematic manipulation of financial records and fabrication of customer complaints constitute multiple felony charges. The planned sale of assets under false pretenses adds additional criminal liability." Derek was already reaching for his phone, probably calling his own lawyer or trying to figure out how to distance himself from Madison's scheme. "This is all a misunderstanding," Madison said desperately. "Everything I've done has been in the best interests of the business and the family." "The recordings suggest otherwise," James replied calmly, "as does the documented evidence of deliberate employee sabotage and intellectual property theft." The morning that had started with my parents learning the truth about Madison's deception was ending with the complete exposure of her entire scheme. But I knew this was just the beginning of the battle to save what she had been systematically trying to destroy. Derek was already backing toward the door, clearly planning to abandon Madison now that legal consequences were becoming real. "Madison, I think we should discuss our consulting arrangement privately," he said, his tone suggesting their partnership was about to end abruptly. But it was too late for strategic retreats. The truth was, the evidence was documented, and the people Madison had manipulated and betrayed were ready to fight back. The counterattack had officially begun. Within 48 hours of confronting Madison with the evidence, our quiet family dispute had transformed into a community-wide revelation that exposed the depth of her deception and Derek's manipulation. James moved quickly to file legal complaints with both the District Attorney's Office and the State Attorney General's Consumer Fraud Division. The recordings of Madison's phone conversations provided prosecutors with clear evidence of intent to commit fraud, while the forged documents and manipulated financial reports demonstrated a pattern of systematic deception. But the most devastating blow to Madison's scheme came from an unexpected source. Derek, realizing that his real estate empire was about to be scrutinized by investigators, panicked and attempted to destroy evidence of his various fraudulent activities. Unfortunately for him, he made the mistake of trying to shred documents in his office dumpster, where they were discovered by a maintenance worker who recognized the severity of what he had found. Those documents revealed that Derek's entire business operation was built on illegal practices, bribing city officials for favorable zoning decisions, using shell companies to hide ownership of properties acquired through fraudulent means, and manipulating environmental assessments to hide contamination issues that would have prevented development approvals. The local newspaper ran the story on Wednesday morning with the headline, "Local Developers' Fraud Scheme Targets Family Businesses." By noon, investigators were seizing Derek's assets and uncovering evidence of similar schemes targeting other small business owners throughout the region. Madison found herself facing not only the collapse of her bakery acquisition plan, but also criminal charges as an accomplice to Derek's broader fraud operation. The corporate buyers who had been interested in purchasing our recipes and location immediately withdrew their offers when the legal complications became public. But the community response was what truly turned the situation around. Mrs. Patterson organized a group of former employees and longtime customers who began documenting the positive impact Golden Crust Bakery had made over the years. Tommy collected written statements from customers expressing their loyalty to our traditional approaches and their concern about the changes Madison had implemented. Sarah compiled a list of community events we had supported through donated goods and volunteer time, demonstrating our role as a neighborhood anchor, rather than just a commercial enterprise. Local business owners who had worked with Derek in the past came forward with their own stories of suspicious dealings and manipulative behavior. The investigation revealed that Madison and Derek had targeted at least 6 other family businesses in similar schemes, using the same tactics of manufactured financial crises and fake efficiency reports to convince owners to surrender control. By Friday afternoon, Madison was facing charges that included fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and theft of intellectual property. Derek was looking at potential federal charges for mail fraud, wire fraud, and racketeering in connection with his broader criminal enterprise. But the personal consequences were just as significant as the legal ones. Our parents, devastated by how completely they had been manipulated, asked Madison to move out of the family home while the legal proceedings were ongoing. The trust that had taken a lifetime to build had been destroyed in a matter of weeks through her calculated deception. Madison's college friends and professional network began distancing themselves as news of the fraud charges spread through social media and local news coverage. The marketing degree she had used to justify her takeover of the bakery turned out to be from an unaccredited online program that provided no actual business education. Derek's real estate company collapsed within days as investors discovered the extent of his illegal activities. Properties that had been acquired through fraudulent means were seized by authorities, and several development projects were halted pending environmental and legal reviews. The corporate buyers who had been interested in mass-producing our recipes found themselves under investigation for their role in what prosecutors characterized as a scheme to acquire family business assets through fraudulent intermediaries. Meanwhile, something beautiful was happening in response to the crisis. Mrs. Patterson approached me on Saturday morning with a proposal that took my breath away. "Alva, dear, I've been thinking about our situation," she said, settling into the chair across from my kitchen table. "What if this disaster is actually an opportunity to build something better than what we had before?" She pulled out a folder filled with business plans, financial projections, and legal documents. "I've been meeting with some of the other employees and longtime customers," she continued. "We want to help you start a new bakery, one that's owned and operated by people who actually care about quality and community." The proposal was more comprehensive than I could have imagined. Tommy had identified a perfect location in a renovated historic building downtown. Sarah had researched small business loans and grants available for community-focused enterprises. Mrs. Patterson had contacted suppliers who were eager to work with a business that valued traditional methods and ethical practices. "We've already got 15 customers who want to invest in the new business," Mrs. Patterson explained. "Not for profit, but because they believe in what you're trying to build. Mrs. Rodriguez wants to contribute $5,000. Mr. Thompson offered $10,000. The Morrison family wants to help with $25,000. Customer investment. People who valued our work enough to put their own money behind our success. But the most exciting part," she said, opening the last section of her folder, "is the partnership proposal." Mrs. Patterson had been quietly working with a local entrepreneur named Rachel Foster, who owned a successful catering company and had been looking for opportunities to expand into retail baking. Rachel's business complemented our skills perfectly. She had the customer relationships and event planning expertise we would need to grow, while we had the recipe development and artisan production capabilities she wanted to offer her clients. "Rachel is proposing a 50-50 partnership," Mrs. Patterson explained. "You would handle all the baking and recipe development, she would manage catering and event services, and together you could build something neither of you could achieve alone." The financial projections showed that a combined bakery and catering operation could be profitable within 6 months and thriving within 2 years. More importantly, the business model was based on quality craftsmanship and community relationships rather than cost-cutting and mass production. On Sunday afternoon, I met with Rachel Foster at the proposed location for our new venture. The building was a beautifully restored 1920s commercial space with exposed brick walls, original hardwood floors, and huge windows that filled the interior with natural light. "This space has so much potential," Rachel said as we walked through the empty rooms. "We could have the bakery operation visible from the customer area so people can watch the artistic process. The upstairs could be expanded into a teaching kitchen for community cooking classes." Community cooking classes, an opportunity to share knowledge and skills rather than hoarding them for competitive advantage. "I've been following what happened with your family's bakery," Rachel continued. "I'm so sorry you went through that experience, but I'm excited about the possibility of building something positive from such a difficult situation." She handed me a detailed partnership agreement that had been prepared by her attorney. "Everything would be completely transparent," she explained. "Equal ownership, shared decision-making, and a commitment to treating employees as valued team members rather than disposable resources." The contrast with Madison's approach couldn't have been more stark. Where Madison had used secrecy and manipulation to acquire control, Rachel was offering openness and collaboration. Where Madison had planned to eliminate experienced workers to cut costs, Rachel wanted to build a team that would grow and develop together. By Sunday evening, I had made my decision. On Monday morning, I walked into Golden Crust Bakery for the last time as an employee. Madison was there meeting with lawyers and trying to salvage something from the wreckage of her scheme. She looked up when I entered, her face a mixture of anger and desperation. "Alva, we need to discuss the transition process," she said, as if she still had any authority over the situation. "There's nothing to discuss," I replied calmly. "I'm resigning from this position effective immediately to pursue other opportunities." I placed my apron on the counter along with my keys to the building and a formal letter of resignation that James had helped me prepare. "You can't just walk away," Madison said desperately. "We have legal agreements about your continued employment during the ownership transition." "Those agreements were based on fraudulent representations," I replied. "They're not legally binding." Madison stared at the resignation letter, realizing that her plan to extract our family recipes and production methods had just collapsed completely. "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked, and for the first time since this nightmare began, she sounded genuinely frightened rather than manipulative. "That's not my problem anymore," I said simply. "You made your choices, and now you get to live with the consequences." I walked out of Golden Crust Bakery for the final time, but instead of feeling sad about the end of that chapter, I felt excited about the beginning of something new. Madison had thought she was destroying my life, but she had actually freed me to build something better than I ever could have achieved within the constraints of our family business. The tables had turned completely, and now it was time to create the future I actually wanted. 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of Heritage and Heart Bakery, watching the morning sun stream through windows that overlooked a bustling downtown street. The space Rachel and I had created together exceeded every dream I had dared to imagine during those dark weeks when Madison's betrayal felt like the end of everything. Mrs. Patterson was at her decorating station training 2 young apprentices in the sugarwork techniques she had perfected over decades. Her face glowed with pride as she guided their hands through the delicate process of creating edible flowers that would grace a wedding cake for a couple who had specifically requested her artistry. Tommy managed our delivery operation with 3 vehicles and a team of 5 drivers who treated customer service as a personal mission. His route optimization had expanded our reach to surrounding communities, while his attention to detail ensured that every order arrived exactly as promised. Sarah had become our customer experience coordinator, creating systems that made every interaction feel personal and meaningful. She remembered preferences, celebrated milestones, and built relationships that turned casual customers into passionate advocates for everything we represented. The business had grown beyond anything we had projected. Rachel's catering expertise had opened doors to corporate accounts, wedding venues, and special events throughout the region. My recipe development had expanded into seasonal specialties, custom creations, and signature items that drew customers from hundreds of miles away. But more importantly, we had created exactly the kind of workplace and community space that Madison's corporate efficiency model never could have achieved. Our teaching kitchen hosted classes 3 evenings per week, where community members learned traditional baking techniques, developed their own recipe variations, and built friendships around shared creativity. Local high school students worked part-time positions that taught them valuable skills while earning money for college. Senior citizens found meaningful volunteer opportunities, sharing their knowledge and staying connected to their community. The financial success had been remarkable, but the personal satisfaction was even more valuable. We had proven that businesses could prioritize quality craftsmanship and human relationships while still achieving strong profitability and sustainable growth. Madison's legal situation had resolved in ways that balanced justice with opportunities for redemption. She had pled guilty to fraud charges and received a sentence that included restitution payments, community service, and 3 years of probation. The judge had specifically ordered her community service to be performed at local food banks and nonprofit organizations where she would experience the impact of genuine service to others. Derek had faced federal charges that resulted in significant prison time and the forfeiture of assets acquired through illegal means. His real estate empire had been dismantled, with properties returned to original owners or sold to compensate victims of his various schemes. The corporate buyers who had planned to mass produce our recipes found themselves under ongoing investigation for their role in similar acquisition schemes targeting family businesses across multiple states. But perhaps the most meaningful aspect of Madison's consequences was her personal transformation. 3 months into her community service at the county food bank, she had contacted me through our parents to request a private conversation. We met at a neutral location, a coffee shop downtown, where she looked genuinely different from the confident, manipulative person who had tried to steal everything I valued. Alva. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to understand how sorry I am for everything I put you and the family through. She said, her voice quiet and sincere in a way I had never heard before. The community service has opened my eyes to what really matters, she continued. Working with families who struggle to put food on the table, seeing elderly people who can't afford basic necessities, understanding how much trust and cooperation it takes to help people in crisis. I realize now that everything I thought was important was actually meaningless. She had been working with a counselor to understand how she had become capable of such systematic deception and manipulation. I was so focused on external validation and financial success that I lost sight of basic human decency, she explained. Derek convinced me that family loyalty was just sentimental weakness and that taking advantage of trust was smart business strategy. I believed those lies because they justified doing whatever I wanted without considering the consequences for other people. The conversation was difficult, but I could see genuine remorse and self-reflection that suggested real change was possible. I don't expect you to trust me again, Madison said, but I want you to know that watching what you've built with Rachel and Mrs. Patterson has shown me what I should have been trying to create all along. You've proven that success and integrity don't have to be mutually exclusive. Our parents had also been going through their own process of healing and understanding. The discovery that they had been manipulated so completely had shaken their confidence in their own judgment, but it had also motivated them to examine how their treatment of my contributions had made Madison's deception possible. We took your dedication for granted, Mom admitted during a family dinner at their house. We assumed you would always be there no matter how we treated your ideas or valued your work. Madison was able to manipulate us because we hadn't been paying attention to how much you were actually contributing. Dad had struggled even more with the realization that his desire to see Madison succeed had blinded him to clear signs that something was wrong. I wanted to believe she had finally found her direction in life, he said. When she presented those professional-looking reports and confident business plans, I thought she had matured into someone who could take responsibility for important decisions. I didn't want to see the evidence that she was lying about everything. The family healing process was ongoing, but it was built on honesty and accountability, rather than avoidance and wishful thinking. As I reflected on everything that had happened, I realized that Madison's betrayal had ultimately become the catalyst for creating a life that was more fulfilling and meaningful than anything I could have achieved within the limitations of our original family business. Being forced to start over had given me the opportunity to build something from scratch with partners who shared my values and vision. The crisis had revealed who my true allies were, while eliminating relationships based on obligation rather than mutual respect. Most importantly, I had learned that personal integrity and professional success could reinforce each other rather than competing for priority. The young apprentices working with Mrs. Patterson represented the future we were building together. They were learning not just technical skills, but the importance of craftsmanship dedication and treating customers as valued community members rather than revenue sources. The customers who had invested in our business because they believed in our mission had become partners in creating something that served the entire community rather than just generating profit for distant owners. The employees who had chosen to join our team knew they were valued for their contributions and supported in their professional development rather than being viewed as disposable resources. Heritage and Heart Bakery had become proof that business success could be built on positive relationships, ethical practices, and commitment to quality rather than manipulation, cost-cutting, and exploitation. Standing in that kitchen on a bright Tuesday morning, surrounded by the sounds of productive work and genuine collaboration, I understood that Madison had actually given me the greatest gift possible by forcing me to discover what I was truly capable of achieving. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of something beautiful. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever experienced a situation where someone you trusted completely betrayed that trust for their own benefit? How did you find the strength to rebuild and move forward? Share your story in the comments below because your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story resonated with you, please like this video to help others find it when they need hope during their own difficult times. Subscribe to the channel for more stories about overcoming betrayal and building something beautiful from life's most challenging moments. And please share this with anyone who might be struggling with family drama or workplace injustice. Sometimes knowing that others have survived similar experiences and come out stronger is the encouragement we need to keep fighting for what's right. Thank you for being part of this community where we support each other through life's ups and downs. Remember that every ending can become a new beginning if you have the courage to rebuild with integrity and surround yourself with people who share your values. I hope your own story includes the kind of triumph that comes from staying true to yourself, even when others try to convince you that compromise and manipulation are the only paths to success. Until next time, keep believing in the power of authentic relationships and honest work to create the life you truly deserve.